Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. Today we have Nadège with us from LA, and I am so thrilled that my new friend is here with us. She is a sexologist and so much more, and you're going to find out about some of that today. Welcome, Nadège, to the Radical Rhythm Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you because ever since you told me that you do something with astrology. Now, I can't even remember because I just was so excited I couldn't remember that sexology and astrology. And then you have a business called Pleasure Science. And I've been reading some of those articles. So it seems I don't even know where to start here. Like science seems so clinical and spatial and logical, and astrology, while it is science, it is also something that people put their wishes and hopes in
Yeah.
and intuition. So let's start from the beginning. How did you get interested in the mix of science and sex?
Oh, I love that question. It happened when I was in university. I went to school to be a writer. I was studying English. I didn't really enjoy the experience, partly because I'm such a thorough reader and I was paying for college myself. So I'm taking these classes feeling like I've already learned this stuff. I'm not learning new things here. I'm not reading new things. And I took a class in LGBT studies, and that really opened the door. And so I started studying sex and sort of realized growing up, I was always the person people asked about sex. I was the friend. I know everyone in my friend group who has herpes because I was the person people just felt comfortable talking to about that. And so when I started studying sex and the science of sex, it felt very in alignment. And astrology was just a sort of spiritual practice that I had gravitated towards as a teenager. And speaking of intuition and things like this, the world that we live in is very confusing, and the purpose of humanity is quite ambiguous. And astrology was just the spiritual practice that helped me kind of translate the confusing pathways of life and finding meaning. So I had these sort of two parts of my brain. I had the science part, the scholar part, and everything I've been building with pleasure science as someone who studies human sexuality from, as you said, a very clinical way. And then I also have this very spiritual side of myself, which is truly how I understand the world and how I navigate and process hardship and how I find the blessings and everything that happens, good or bad, in my life.
Wow. I'm thinking about Vi Johnson, who co-hosts this podcast once a month. And she right now, Vi, if you're listening to this, I know you are turned on to the hilt because she's a saposexual. She loves the brain. And here you're combining your sexuality with all this intellectualism.
Oh,
And
I'm a big sapiosexual too. It's sometimes I even struggle, which we could go into a whole other topic about this, but like having to connect to my body, that was something I'm so grateful that I study sex and make this a part of the work that I do, because it didn't come naturally to me to connect to the body until I made that intentional. I've so much in the brain, so heady, and spiritual practices, in fact, like astrology, is something that helped me bring the body and the brain together in my own personal life and then help others with that too.
right. I mean, when I let's start from the beginning. LGBTQ studies.
Yeah,
You majored in that, or you
I
took
did.
courses in that.
No, I double majored in gender and women studies, LGBT studies. Try saying that 3 times fast. And my specialty was sex. And so when I got to university, I was a transfer student. So I was already a junior. And when you get to UC Berkeley, which is where I went, you have to start writing a research paper when you're a junior. So I showed up and I have, my college telling me you need to write a paper. You're going to spend years writing this paper. And I was just like, well, what could I write about for a few years that wouldn't bore me? Ding, ding. It was sex.
Yeah. Now, At that time, did you identify as part of the LGBT community? Was it
Oh
a
yeah.
search for self as you were doing this, or
100%. It was a big
okay?
search for self. I took the class because I am queer. And then after taking that class, I ended up becoming the leader of the organization Queer Women at Berkeley. But I had come out maybe 2 years before I got to Berkeley. And so when I took this LGBT studies course, it was because I wanted to learn about my history. And it was a course in American queer history. So learning about Stonewall, learning about the riots, all different riots happening throughout the United States, including the one happening before Stonewall in San Francisco with predominantly trans women, which some people feel is the precursor to Stonewall. But fun fact, I did not even know what the Stonewall riots were until I was in my early 20s at UC Berkeley studying, because I went to conservative schools my whole life, conservative private schools, and I did not learn anything about that. So it was a huge experience because I realized I had a history, and the validation that I felt was life-changing.
Thank you for sharing that. I taught in a history department, and I taught queer history. And
Oh,
it was just wonderful to see the epiphanies and just the enthusiasm of the students to learn, usually about their own culture associated with their self-identification. Not
yeah.
always, but mostly. So you went from there, and astrology was something that helped you make sense of
My life.
life in general.
Yeah. Oh yeah, my mom had passed away when I was younger. And so, well, actually, she passed away around the same time that I was at Berkeley, which now was a while ago. So now I feel like it was when I was younger. But um, astrology really helped me with that. And it really helped me make sense of, I always had this question, like, what are we here for? What is the purpose of all of this? And that question bothered me for a long time as a high school student, and even before that, which is kind of a weird thing for a teenager to think about, but sapiosexual, I guess that's what I am. And astrology really helped. There's something in astrology called your North Node. This is your destiny placement. It shows the astrology sign you're meant to integrate into your life. And the way that I understand astrology is through something called archetypal astrology, which connects back to archetypal psychology and Carl Jung and the different patterns of human behavior that we have. And in astrology, I see every single sign as a different archetype, and they have different strengths, different weaknesses, and they represent different things in astrology as well. Because in astrology, there are these things called the houses, and there are 12 of them, and each house represents a different part of your life. There's the house of health, the house of community, the house of career, the house of relationships, the house of sex and creativity. So there are all of these areas of life. And the North Node piece, which is your destiny placement, when my mom had passed, there were some things in my chart that connected to my North Node. And there was a place in my chart that actually predicted that I would have a mother pass away. And so it was really cool to see those things, and then to be able to almost talk to whatever it is out there, whatever the divine thing is that you believe in, God, goddess, the universe, however you call it. Astrology really helped me connect and kind of interpret what was happening. So that way I could see that things were happening always in my greatest favor, and that I could also find peace with this really sad death and find ways to continue to connect to my mom. It's been over a decade now since she passed, but I still feel very connected to her. And even when she passed, like those first 2 years, I also felt very connected to her. And it was interesting because a lot of people really applauded me for being able to graduate top of my class from a university and do other things. And they're like, your mom just died. Are you psychotic, or are you really healthy? Like what? And for me, astrology was just really helpful. And having a spiritual practice was extremely helpful, which interestingly enough, there's a psychologist named Dr. Diana Kirshner, and she is a big proponent of people developing a spiritual practice when they have grief or heartbreak. And she believes, according to the research that she's done, that that's one of the fastest ways to heal when you're grieving over something, is developing a spiritual practice that makes sense to you. And I think that that's what I did kind of unconsciously. I actually didn't discover that research until much later when I was working at Pleasure Science, my company. And I remember finding that and being like, well, that tracks, because astrology really helps me make sense of the things that break my heart.
My apologies for interrupting the program today. I need to tell you about a course that I offer called Aphrodite's Secret. This course helps you overcome obstacles in your sex life. It helps you discover new forms of sexual expression and improve the relationship you're in, or improve your skills for the next relationship you're in. This is Valentine's Day, and I have the course on sale from $347 down to $99. But you do have to purchase it this week, Valentine's Day, up until the 17th, 2024, to purchase the sale price. Now back to your regularly scheduled program. This podcast is about women who march to the beat of a different drum. So perhaps you're seeing why now I really wanted to interview you, because you do march to the beat of your own drum.
Yeah.
How do you use astrology in your sexology practice? And how do clients look at you when you say, let's look at your nodes in your houses and your sign?
Yeah. So the way that I use astrology to help clients, I do sextrology. So I actually wrote a book about it, which you could find on Amazon, and it's called Sextrology. So that's pretty easy to remember. But one way is by doing people's birth charts. So your birth chart is like a snapshot of where you've been and where you're going to go. It tells you what your most recent past life was, and it tells you your strengths, your weaknesses, and it can predict things like, for me, having a mom pass away. And so I do people's birth charts. It's a 1 hour session. And that's really how I help people with astrology. And then for more long-term coaching packages, that's where it's, because if someone wants an astrology reading, they usually found me, they're already spiritual, they are already tuned into that frequency, if you will. And so there isn't really a big, like, let me explain why this is going to work for you. They're already in that kind of spiritual mindset. For other people, sometimes people find me because they want a long-term coaching package and they want to work through some issues for a couple of months. And so I'll say, you can get an astrology add-on where I'll do your chart. And some people are just like, no, that I don't believe in that. I don't want it. Which I'm always like, okay. And then other people are just like, well, I don't believe in it, but I'll get it because why not? I'm already here. And usually those people have some pretty cool breakthroughs. And then, of course, there are the people who are like, oh, astrology, like, don't tell me anymore. I'm in. But yeah, if someone isn't that interested in astrology, I don't really push the subject. And in fact, in my business, I actually didn't include astrology in my business until about 2 years ago. I was kind of closeted about my spiritual practice because I had a lot of limiting beliefs that it would make me no longer credible as a scholar if people found out that, I have my crystals and my oracle deck and my astrology practice. And about 2 years ago, I had been doing astrology readings without advertising for it, through friends, through word of mouth. And people kept saying, you need to do more of this. And so I finally went public with it and people really loved it. And I ended up writing a book about it because people wanted to learn more. And so it's sort of like, I don't believe in trying to change anybody's mind. That's not what I'm here to do. But I am really glad that I'm now open about it because I feel like I'm way more authentically myself and have a lot more tools to help people if those are the tools that they want.
Right. I mean, you and I both have lived a life where we've had to shut down parts of who we are
Yeah.
at different times, whether it's our love of sexuality.
Yeah.
What does that make you? It makes you a slut, or
Yeah.
something's the matter with you. You have an obsession, right? Or it was our orientation, and what does queer mean anyhow? And what does that mean about you? Let alone astrology. And I just, it's a belief that, well, a belief system that the more you get into it, I found this for almost anything, right? You start to understand something, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you don't realize how much you really don't understand.
Oh, absolutely. I
How
I
much
relate to that.
intuition do you use? How much is intuition, and how much is, you would say, science?
There is a science to it with the geometry of it. So, the science part of astrology comes with the degrees of where everything hits and how different planets face each other in the sky when you were born. So, Mars could be 90 degrees from Venus, which means something specific. And so that's where the science of it comes in. And then, as for the intuition, I have always had a very good intuition with it. Like, I think that I think every spiritual practice, in a way, is us trying to make sense of the human experience, and that people should connect to whichever one relates to them the most. I always, on an intuition subconscious level, was very drawn to astrology. And I I do have kind of an otherworldly intuition with it. So I'll see someone's chart and I'll see some of the degrees or things, and that'll be a part of it. But I also just get kind of gut nudges. Like, I'll see that someone has a Chiron in Cancer, and I'll be like, "Oh, do you have mommy issues?" And they'll be like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Cool." Like, I just pick up on these things, and that's part of just my own personal magic with it, which I do think if someone studies a topic, you'll get that, but that's sort of just a natural gift and skill. And astrology really speaks to me. Like, I've explored tarot. I don't connect, like, I love getting tarot readings for myself, but that'll never be the way, like, it will never be astrology. Astrology just makes sense to me in some way that is unspoken, and that's why it's my medium. It's almost like it chose me in a way.
Very insightful. Very insightful. So if we move this another level, let's move into the sacred, right?
Yeah.
And sacred sexuality. And when people hear that, a lot of times they think it's like hocus pocus, or it's just a way to get you to come to a retreat and have an orgy, uh, right? What is sacred sexuality to you, and what does it mean to you?
It means to me that everybody is sacred and that sex is sacred. One of the reasons I like astrology, I was raised Jewish and I went to a Roman Catholic high school. So I know a lot about other traditions, especially the dominant ones. Um, what sacred sexuality means to me, and even astrology, is that there's nothing outside of yourself. You're the sacred one. You don't need to look to a god or a priest or a monk to interpret things for you. You absolutely can, because those people can be really tuned in and very spiritual themselves. But sacred sexuality to me means that you are God. You are your own goddess, God. You can go inside of yourself and use your own sexual understanding to connect to your divinity. There's a reason in French why they call, orgasm the little death, as if you cross over and come back again. I think and also just sex is a very otherworldly experience. When you have a sexual experience that you're very present for, that really takes you to another level, it can be a little godlike.
And absolutely, absolutely. The connection, one level connecting to yourself,
Yeah.
two connecting to a partner, and
Yeah.
three, the both of you traveling together I'm not speaking astrophysically, but could be,
Yeah.
to a divine place during the act of sex.
Yeah, absolutely. Just because connection is so sacred and sex is a way you connect to others, connect to yourself. And then even with history, humans were worshiping sex. That was one of the first ways, at least that we have through archaeology and the research that I've done, where humans, when 50,000 years ago, when we were connecting and forming communities and forming tribes, we were worshiping sex. We were worshiping the ability for certain people to give birth. Like, what even is that? Which still blows my mind. Like, what even is that? You can make another human and you can do it through the pleasure of sex. I'm also a big fan of people not having kids in this day and age, and that's a beautiful thing. But just the mere fact that we can do that with our bodies is another quite sacred thing. And I think it's a reason why the dominant culture over the last several thousand years has tried to control sexuality, to make people feel like sexuality is shameful, that it is private. Sex is a huge form of power, and it is a very spiritual thing. If you want to control people, a great way to do that is to control them from the source, which is sex in a lot of ways. So spiritual sexuality for me isn't just, this idea of, oh, we're all sacred and let's all hold hands. It's also kind of political and it's revolutionary and it's a sort of challenge to take back what I feel has been taken from a lot of people, which is our confidence in our body and in defining our own pleasure.
Have you had a hard time starting your business and growing it
Mm.
because of a more conservative political atmosphere?
No, but I also live in Los Angeles and, went to school in San Francisco and was protected by the California liberal. I'm sure I was protected in a lot of ways there. So for me in my business, there's been a lot of opportunity. And I also think because of trailblazers like you that make it much easier for people now to, go up and say, hey, sex and kink isn't normal. I mean, it is normal. Sorry, opposite. It is normal because people have been doing this now for decades in really powerful revolutionary ways. So it's been not easy being an entrepreneur because I don't think it's easy for anyone, but it's certainly there is a place for all the work that I do, and that's just something I'm very grateful for.
The next steps, I want to make sure that we get a chance for you to talk about 2024 because as you're developing your business and your a podcast or you have broadcasts, I know that,
Yeah.
and you're building your business, 2024 looks like it's a next step for you. What are your
Yeah.
plans?
My plans are I want to put out another book. I started my business writing articles on the internet, and so I'd love to publish a book with just my best articles. And I will be having a podcast. I was going to launch it this year, but I have other fun things that I'm focusing on. So I do think that'll be something that I launch next year. And then also just doing live events, sex panels, retreats, trying to put these things together so that people can connect. I love connecting with people and I love bringing people together. And I feel like we just learn with sex, especially, we learn so much faster in groups and we undo shame really powerfully in groups because you hear other people's struggles and you realize you aren't alone. And with sex, one of the ways that people, not specific people, but kind of the norms of society uses sex to control people is by teaching us we shouldn't talk about it. And that's shameful. So being in a group setting is really powerful. But yeah, that's in 2024, we're going to have some cool events, hopefully launching a podcast if the timing is right, and definitely having some more books coming out.
Wow, it's interesting your career path and mine. We almost started as direct opposites and we're meeting in the middle right now.
Mm.
I started with events and retreats and now books and then coaching. right? And you started with coaching and built that up and wrote books, and now you're moving into the event and retreat space.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's really fun. Yeah, it's great to just connect with people in so many different ways, as many ways as we can.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate. I had Amy Rowan on a previous episode of the Radical Rhythm podcast. She invited the both of us to be on a summit together, and that's how I met you.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think we're just at the beginning of many different collaborations that you might see the two of us together. And
Absolutely.
can you believe the time is up already for this
I
podcast?
could just talk to you forever, I feel.
And we did before we turned on the recording.
We did. We had to get to a point where we're like, we need to turn this on because we're just going.
Right, right. Nadège, thank you so much for just giving us a sampling of all the things you do, because
Thank you.
sex and science, sex and astrology, sacred sex, we kind of looked at the umbrella of what you do without diving deep into any one topic, which we can do next time. I'm hoping there's a next time.
Yeah. Oh, always.
Again,
Thank you so much for having me too, because the work you do and your career is incredibly impressive. And I'm surprised you haven't been doing podcasting for longer because you have so many cool things and cool people to share with. So
thank you so much. I can't wait to hit a more international audience, and I
mm,
know we both have that in common. And
yeah.
doing some things in Italy and France this year, and I understand you're looking for some things in France, and you're French.
Yep. I am. I'm a French citizen. Yeah.
Yeah, so for the audience out there, look for more to come from the both of us. And do you take appointments? I will put your
I
business information
do.
under this. Do you take like
Yeah.
face-to-face appointments in LA?
I do virtual appointments usually. And you can either book me for an astrology reading. I do consultations if you want to talk about one topic. But I'd say the most popular offering is just the one-to-one coaching where we have weekly sessions and people learn new skills and figure out what sexual empowerment means to them. And we really work on that for a few months and then they have major breakthroughs and life changes. And if that sounds like something that anyone listening is interested in, you can go to pleasurescience.com and look up the sex breakthrough coaching curriculum that I have. But yeah, I like doing virtual appointments because one, sometimes I just want to be in my PJs talking to you with my crystals on my chest. And also because it allows me to serve people even if they're not in Los Angeles. And I love working with people all over the world. So yeah.
Well, thank you again for coming to our podcast and sharing your wisdom with us. And till next time, tune in and subscribe to the Radical Rhythm podcast.